G'day guys, thanks for checking out Super Little Challenges. My guest today is Ivan Bodley, who is a very accomplished bass player and music director. He's an authentic rock star, very humble, and he has played with 50 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees. He's also performed in 12 Broadway shows and himself has been inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame. He has written a book called Am I Famous Yet? Memoir of a Working Class Rock Star. I love the name, and given my own experiences playing in bands, we had an awesome chat and shared some pretty strange, random, and fairly humorous rock and roll stories. Enjoy this one, guys. Let's go.
Well, good evening to you then.
Thank you very much. Nice mug you got there.
Made it myself.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's handcrafted for the listeners. It's got a nice skull, rock and roll skull on there.
Of course, all my ceramics have tattoos on them.
I'm excited to talk to you because I've got a bit of rock history myself. Let's call it working class rock history, as you've coined the term.
Indeed.
And I mean, essentially, this shows about personal challenges and overcoming obstacles and challenges, but in terms of rock and roll and the craftsmanship from playing bass, there's no end to the amount of challenges that come with that, right?
I mean, I think any musical pursuit is a lifelong pursuit. You really you never completely master it, and there's always something more that you can do. There's something, and it's hard too, because you can look around and you can always find somebody who's better at doing some aspect of what you do. You kind of have to sort of keep your head down and keep your blinders on and be self-referential. But it's a lifetime study. It never ends. It's kind of cool in that way.
Was it something that came natural to you young, particularly bass, or did you dabble in other instruments as a kid?
I dabble is exactly the right word. I tried viola for an afternoon. I tried guitar for a week. I tried piano for probably a year, maybe in junior high school, until the mean old piano teacher down the street just kind of turned me off of the whole thing. And then I didn't have anything particularly in mind. No specific aspirations. But generally, I thought music would be fun, something I always wanted to be involved in, And then I have a kind of a working theory that I've developed later on, that your instrument chooses you. Because there's something about the particular role in the orchestra or the band or whatever. There's a personality type that goes with your type of instrument. So for me, playing bass, it's the bridge between the rhythm and the harmony. It's the sort of one of the foundational aspects of a rock band or a dance band, and it's not a lot of hair flipping out on the front of the stage like the lead singer and the lead guitar player. Although we certainly do that. We certainly do, flip the hair from time to time, but it's not the primary job description, as it were.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. It's pretty cool when you say it finds you. I remember the first time I saw a drum kit, it kind of just blew my mind. It sort of looked like a spaceship, and I wanted to I just had this curiosity of like, how do I drive this thing? But it triggered something in me, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I had like a natural talent toward it. I really had to work at it. But I'm just definitely more of a rhythm guy than I don't hear melodies and things like that. But I think that's pretty. Yeah, I think it's cool when you say it finds you.
Yeah, it's a sort of a personality type of thing. And then, I came to it very late, or relatively late, I should say. I didn't pick up a bass till I was a senior in high school. So that's kind of, you think about, child prodigies that are in conservatory since they're 3 years old. I was nowhere near that. And also the particular school I went to was kind of posh, actually, but they had no music program. So like it was like a private boarding school in my town, but I was like the townie, the local kid that they allowed in. but they had no music program. So I really had to discover it all on my own. I really had to be self-motivated, take, lessons from a guy that I knew in my town that played bass. He charged me $15 an hour to teach me how to play, that kind of stuff. So in a way, sort of not having a formalized initial training approach. I got educated later, but initially, when you're self-motivated, it kind of makes you want to, you're doing it completely for your own reasons. You're not trying to just take a band class in high school, that as part of the requirement or anything like that. You're doing it completely on your own, and that's a very motivating sort of factor. Way to
you don't have someone cracking the whip behind you. It's purely
exactly.
self-generated. That's pretty cool. So, when did you join your first proper band, and do you remember your first gig?
Oh, I remember it well. Sure. Again, it was in high school. So, my class, the class of guys at my all boys school in Chattanooga was 100 kids. And I guess, maybe 4 of us played, 2 guitar players, 1 bass player, 1 drummer, so like, there's your band right there, kind of by default almost, And at the end of every school year, they had a talent show kind of thing where, the kids who were in bands in this class could get up and play. People would do sketches, that kind of thing. It's kind of like it was called the International Talent and Lampoon Show. It was supposed to be a thing. So this was, this is a school where I was not very successful or popular as a kid. Like, it was definitely kind of the odd man out sort of thing. But suddenly, like, there's 600 kids in this gymnasium, like, screaming in approval of something that I'm doing. And I'm like, well, these guys wanted to beat me up yesterday. Like, what changed? I realized, like, instantly, this is a very powerful sort of thing. And maybe I need to start chasing that. And also, when it came time for the talent show that year, nobody had organized it. Like, it was a student-run sort of thing. So it kind of fell to me, the last minute, very last minute. Like, we don't have a platform for a stage. We don't have a PA rented, nothing. So it kind of felt for me to organize the thing. And I called my friend, who was also my bass teacher, and he had a public address system. We rented it for $100. I think we rented it. And I charged $1 a head at the door. So I actually made money on my first ever gig. I actually came home with a profit. I didn't pay the rest of the bands. I pocketed the rest of the $3.80, whatever I made. But
it might have set forth a false expectation there of
it kind of did. Yeah, it kind of did. Like, oh, I'm gonna be approved of, and I'm gonna make money at everything that I do. Took a great deal of time after that to recreate that success. But the first time out was very intoxicating.
But that's the thing, as a kind of indie DIY musician, you do end up like, if you sometimes find yourself booking the show, organizing the mixer, right. when I know I did that a few times. I did used to enjoy it, making the poster,
sure.
Organizing the gig. But then at times I was like, really, I should just be focused on preparing to play the drums here. Like, is the stress of running an entire event taken away from me just hitting the buckets,
Right. No, that's all part of it, and being a self-motivated, self-employed freelance musician, how much am I being my manager and my booking agent and my guitar technician and my merchandising guy and my social media guy, in addition to the fact that I also have to show up and perform accurately. Like this week alone, I'm doing 4 or 5 different sets of repertoire just this week. For different shows, different band leaders, because the freelance thing. So like, I just have this enormous amount of material that I have charts on my iPad to keep myself, in line. Remember, but it's just like this. The amount of preparation that goes into just the playing alone should be a full-time job. And as you say, that all these other aspects, when we used to years ago make the postcards and mail them out and the flyers and all that kind of stuff as well.
There's so many moving parts to being in a band that often people who haven't necessarily been in bands, they just see the performance, but the amount of moving parts, and I sort of, I'm always fascinated by band relationships and dynamics within bands. I think
there's one member of the band always had to be like the social director. You know, like the person who was good at the networking and had the friends network and the fans network, and, you know, regardless of whether they were the front person or the rhythm guitar player or what, but that particular aspect of their personality was what made for a successful show. Like, how do you get the people through the door to pay the admission price? You know, you had to have somebody who was really good at working that angle. And that was never my personal strength. You know, I very wisely tried to leave that to other people. But it's, that personality type, almost one of them has to be in every band, really.
I think you touched on those. I think it's about knowing the strength of each member and kind of nurturing that. But often that can get lost in a band relationship because there's so much there's egos at play. There's you're getting your creative thing across. As you say, if you're more taking you're not necessarily the showman of the band, but you're like the concrete, the foundation, finding this harmony and balance was always something I found it fascinating within bands, but it was always something that was hard to get right. Call it right's probably the wrong word, but hard to find that. And I think some of obviously the most significant bands in history, like I always think of the Who, you know, like got 4 completely different personalities. Like you could not have 4 different guys, but somehow, some like Entwistle and Mooney alone, polar opposites in terms of explosiveness and like just sitting in the pocket. But somehow they had this thing that you can't really describe. That's right.
And also the interesting thing for me about that band, because I was a big fan growing up too, is like it was Roger's band. Roger was the leader and the guy who formed the band. Everybody thinks it's Pete because Pete's became the principal writer, but it was Roger, and Roger's a real brawler. He will punch you in the face if you do something he doesn't like. And then got to the point where they had to sort of like had an anti-face punching clause in their contract because Roger tended to get a little physical in the early days, from what I understand, you know. So, the band dynamics, the personality dynamics. Plus, then also, if you get to be successful like that, or even, just working for a living and you're in a touring situation, you know, you have to understand that you're going to be playing together for an hour or 2 hours a day, and you're living together for the extra 22 hours of the day. And how does that dynamic work? You know, because that can be, you know, woefully out of balance. And, you know, there's people that you may love playing with, you just cannot stand to be on a bus with. You know, that happens a lot too.
Yeah. And the decision you've got to make, it's like, I love playing with this guy, but do I want to sit on a bus with him for 48 hours
he's a miserable hang
in the middle of Poland, you know?
Yeah, exactly right. That's exactly right. And I've seen people get jobs who were not the best technician on their particular instrument, but they're just good hang. They're just good people, you know, so they're more fun to be around. So, and I completely respect that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I'm sure like you probably don't have a number on the amount of shows you've played over the years, but what's the thing I loved about gigs is I remember all of them, you know. I probably did like 500 in total, you know, in between the age of 18 to late 20s. But I remember every single one for a different reason, you know, whether it was that we played just to the bar staff, or whether something blew up on stage, or whether we played in a public square, you know, to a couple of thousand people, or you know, the shows that went well, the shows that went terribly. They all stand out for different reasons. So it must be awesome for you to have this memory bank, call it, of these different experiences and shows. There's nothing really like it. And what's what's one of the more stranger, some of the more strangest circumstances you found yourself in on stage?
Well, there's been a bunch of them. I've kept very close statistics on my number of shows and stuff like that for the last, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years because of income tax purposes. I need to know like how much I'm making, where, what my estimated quarterly taxes are, so I stay ahead of the IRS, the tax man. But also just out of curiosity too, because my aunt is a psychotherapist, so she's got a freelance occupation. So her number of clients per week changes, and she told me this early on. She's by keeping comparisons month to month, year to year, she knows that her February is slow and her July is busy every year. So that way, like when you have a slow month in the winter, you don't start thinking like, well, the career is over, the jig is up. So I started doing the same thing, trying to sort of like, and it turns out I have a very similar sort of thing. The winters for me are very slow and the summers are extremely busy. So I probably have between 3,000 and 4,000 career shows at this point. And there's a whole lot of them that I don't fully remember, but I can be reminded of. Like now, even now, it happened to me just the other day too. I walked into a facility. It was a theater in Cape May, New Jersey, and the name sounded familiar. Like I think I've been there. I'm pretty sure I played this theater. I'm not sure. As soon as I walked in the door and saw the layout of the place, like, oh yes, I remember this specifically. I remember the whole where the stage is. I remember the bleachers. I remember the whole thing. So like my memory can be prompted to remind me of these things, and it's pretty good. And then, but as you say, the weird ones really stick out. There's one that I kind of detail in my book, where we played a wedding in a decommissioned Gothic synagogue in Manhattan with all this really dramatic lighting. I think it was built in the late 1880s. A beautiful building, and I played there a lot. Actually, they do events there quite a bit. But this one was a particularly decked out one. The florist had to be like, I don't know, $50,000 worth of floral arrangements. They constructed a moat in the center of the dance floor with the sweetheart table on it, with literally water around it and trees and I don't know, the wedding. It was typical $100,000 plus wedding kind of thing. But we were just playing with a trio, an acoustic trio, acoustic bass, acoustic guitar, and drums, which is unusual because usually they want a big dance party at these kinds of events, right? And what we realized when we got there is that this entire wedding had been constructed with caterers, an officiant to do the ceremony, photographers, videographers, a band, servers, the whole thing. 0 guests. There were no guests there. It was just the couple in the room. It was the most awkward, uncomfortable, weird thing I've ever seen, much less experienced. And we ended up calling it the Hannibal Lecter wedding because we wouldn't have been surprised to read in the paper the next day that the groom had eaten the bride after the show.
That's phenomenal.
It was phenomenal. And who spends that much money on a wedding for nobody? You're not even your mother-in-law. Nobody was there. Not one.
There wasn't even like a best man or a one.
No, not even like close friends and family. Nobody. Parents, nobody. And there was one point where the groom got up to go use the restroom because it's a 4-hour gig. Like we're there all night, and we were playing like "Fly Me to the Moon," like really quiet. Fly me to the moon. And the bride suddenly turned to us and said, "Oh, that's like a song from one of our favorite anime cartoons." And we're like, she talked to us. She made eye contact. Like, do we respond? Like, do we acknowledge the fact that we're all human beings in the same room? It was so bizarre. And we're like, oh yeah, great.
You
great.
Guys could have made a speech. You could have been the speeches. Wow,
I get uncomfortable just thinking about it. Like it was so odd, so weird.
That's extraordinary. I mean, must have been an experience for them.
They seemed thrilled. They loved it. All the trappings were there. The only thing they did the cake and the fish and everything. The only thing they didn't do was a bouquet toss because there would have been nobody there to catch it.
That's true. the drummer. Do it to the band, not away from the band.
Whoa.
Well, one of my first shows was actually in a public toilet at a swimming pool. They turned it into a battle of the changing area. They turned into a battle of the bands. So I arrived at this swimming pool and did this gig in the toilet, basically. And one song in, I heard the hiss of the smoke machine, and it was directly under my stool, and my entire drum kit disappeared in smoke, and I couldn't see what I was hitting, and that was my introduction into the world of rock and roll.
That's some show business special effects right there in real time.
But going back to when you were talking about forecasting your year and so on, that's pretty cool, because it's counterintuitive, I think, to what people think of the glamorous rock star, in the fact that you're getting your house in order in a very practical way so that you can sustain what you do as a living, which is kind of the bread and butter of and that doesn't go with the glamorous stereotype of the
right.
So you seem to have a nice approach to that.
Well, some of that's by necessity, and some of it's just sort of for my own personal sort of comfort level. Because, like I said, if you're sitting home all through a February, you start freaking out. It's like, I may have made a really bad decision here doing the freelance thing. Do I need to get some day work in? Like, what do I need to do here? So that sort of just kind of calm the nerves over time, and then also at this point, I've gotten so many years of experience in doing it that I don't worry about it as much anymore. I just know that, it'll be okay. And I got some nuts saved up for the winter, so I'll be fine. Because I know, when we get to the summer, where we are now in the middle of July, it's just going to be furiously busy. And it's that way every year. So I have the benefit of hindsight. But going into it, I just like to keep all my ducks in a row and know that I got the rent covered, know that all the utility bills covered. Is everything, everything cool? So I don't have to worry about that stuff as much. Keep tabs on it.
Yeah. Did you work for a label as well?
I did, yeah. My first job out of college was as a publicist for Epic Records. So as a major label publicist, and some of our artists who were sort of my clients, were like Michael Jackson, Luther Vandross, Gloria Estefan. I worked a little more directly with the band Living Colour, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, Stanley Clarke, Weird Al Yankovic, believe it or not, and some people like that. So very, very interesting, because in college, I'd been a college radio DJ and the music director of my college station. So I had all these relationships with the promo people at the labels. So I decided, music business, that's what I definitely want to do. And I was playing sort of, amateurishly in college, but it was nowhere near sort of being what I thought would be a career path. I thought it was just kind of a professional hobby at the time. And I got into the music business, and I had, I started out making copies and getting coffee and whatever, and it ended up with a corporate Amex card and an expense account by the end of it of 3 years, and came to realize that the music business has nothing to do with music. It's all marketing. It's a marketing. They could be selling soap. They don't care what the product is. They just need to get sort of numbers out the door. So in that way, it's not a very creative field. Like, you get to be around all the rock stars, which is kind of fun. And I have some photographs that I just unearthed in my dad's attic a few years ago that had been sitting there for, 30 years that I didn't even remember taking. Like me standing next to Ozzy Osbourne. How do you not remember meeting Ozzy Osbourne and having a photo next to him? But, it's just sort of like those kind of things would happen at the label. I have another one with Alice Cooper too. Like, no memory of it. But they just like those things would happen at the label, and you get a photo op, and, you're next to the guy for 1/500th of a second to go click, and then it goes in the box, and, you forget about it over 30 years. So it was interesting. So I got a real inside view into what the business was, and decided that ultimately that wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a creative type. So, I quit the business and freelanced around for about a year, and then decided what I really needed to do, I was going to make a go for it, was go get formally educated. So I went back to music school when I was like 25 and graduated from Berklee College of Music. So I'm a board certified bass player now. Which that awesome. And, you know, used to say the joke was that and 25 cents will get you a phone call. You know, like I've got my certificate probably right here in a file drawer. Nobody's ever asked to see it. It means nothing in the scheme of life. So I'm qualified to do a job that I've got zero guarantees of having any success at. And I kind of had gotten there thinking like, really, that's the only thing I want to do. I don't have any sort of backup plan, even though I've got a college degree and I had a previous career in the label, but I didn't want to do that anymore. So I said, all right, I'm going to kind of give it a try. It was a really upsetting realization. It's like, that's all I want to do because, you know, the chances of success of that are just minuscule. And even the chances of just, you know, doing what I've done is just making a living at it for so long are kind of minuscule. But I knew that I needed to give myself the skill sets, you know, with training to allow myself the chance to do that. And also move to New York City, or in this case, move back to New York City because I thought that there were more opportunities here per capita for what I wanted to do. And in hindsight, it kind of worked out, you know. But going into it, I was like, no guarantees here. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
It's pretty cool that being on the inside of the music industry then motivated you to kind of up it a notch in terms of, you know, seeing the flip side of the business side of it made you go, right, I got to kick this into another gear.
Right. Well, I realized too, like, you know, the guys who were gotten famous being in a band, for instance, like that was all they kind of did, maybe. So, like, if your band didn't happen to buy the golden ticket, the magic lottery ticket, and make it, you know, you could only do these 10 songs that you knew. So that really limits your employment opportunities. So, you know, I had to learn how to read music. I had to learn music theory. I had to learn different genres of music. I mean, I was already sort of naturally interested in them anyway, but just sort of being as diverse as possible has allowed me to do, you know, corporate gigs, weddings, funerals, bar mitzvahs, Broadway, along with the rock and roll-y stuff, the Rock and Roll Hall of Famer stuff that I've done, the rock star-y kind of concerts. But in between those, you know, you need to sort of keep the income stream coming in, playing what we call club dates around here. I guess they're called corporate gigs or formal gigs in different parts of the world. But, you know, just, again, working for a living. That's why I call myself, you know, working class rock star. That's what I do.
With such a diverse range of types of gigs, I imagine must have had to find kind of an adaptability to be able to like adapt to different musical performance scenarios pretty quickly. Indeed.
Yeah. It takes sort of having what we call big ears. You know, you have to listen really closely, you know, and also it helps to have a quick reaction time too, especially on the bass chair. Like people expect you to play the root of a chord on every downbeat and be right. Like if you're a guitar player and you kind of, you know the songs in G minor, you can kind of noodle around in G minor, you can kind of get away with murder. Same thing with keyboard players, drummers, no offense, but you could probably play in 4/4 for most things and be okay for a lot of it, not everything. You know, bass players, you kind of have to know the chord changes in advance.
Yep.
You know, and so it's a little more, you got to be a little more prepared in these kind of situations. And then again, I was always curious and appreciative of different genres. And then different gigs require sort of different skill sets. You know, like if you're playing a classical gig or a Broadway gig, you have to know how to follow a conductor. And sometimes the tempo moves, and sometimes things slow down. And sometimes, you know, you have to really like understand what these conducting shapes mean with their hands. You know, and the classical guys, because the violins and the strings, the sound production is sort of so slow. You know, the violins are not known for going like really tight, sharp, fast. They kind of like, you know, more yada. So the classical conductors, the beat is like 1, 2, 3, like it's almost on the upbeat. Like, you know, we're ready for the jazz and rock guys. 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, you're ready for it to be really square on the beat. But if you're looking at a conductor who has classical training, you know that they're conducting way ahead of where they want the sound to actually be.
Right.
So you have to make that an adjustment as a player. And the only way to know that is to have experience standing in front of a rock conductor or a Broadway conductor versus a classical conductor. And, you know, people can tell you that, but until you sort of see it and do it, you're like, I see what's going on, you know.
Well, what are your thoughts on in-ears? Do you use them currently, or do you prefer the sound of the...
Depends on the gig. I have a love-hate with in-ears. If I'm in the room or on a stage with a drummer, I do not like them because drums are very loud. So I've played with foam earplugs in on all my live situations my whole life. I don't want to hear anything. I want deafness because, you know, standing next to snare drums for 40 years just does damage. It just does.
Crash cymbals and stuff. Yeah.
Oh man. And I'm right here on the hi-hat side. I'm right by the crash and I'm right by the, you know, like my right ear should by all intents and purposes just be dysfunctional at this point. But the plugs have kind of saved me. So if I'm on stage with a live drummer, the in-ears don't block out enough ambient noise for me. Like I just hear all drums. But if I'm in a Broadway pit, for instance, where the drums are in an ISO booth, love them because they do block out, you know, everything else in the room. If there's a guitar amp or something like that, or even live strings. So you can set your mix up and really get a nice isolated sort of personalized mix. So it depends on the gig. Live, I don't care for them. In the studio or in a Broadway pit, love them.
Interesting, real different environments. Again, adaptability to.
Right.
That's the thing. It's not no show is like a standard template, right? Like there's certain things you know you need, but the variables. Mm-hmm. The variables aren't consistent.
Now, as a drummer, how do you feel about click tracks?
I always had, because I was in band, you know, I had tuition for a year when I was 18 with a really good teacher, but then I just was really eager to get in bands and got in bands and had a really, you know, I wasn't a technical player, so I had just a very kind of simple approach to rock stuff. And then the first time we did quite a serious recording, the producer was insisting a click track. That's right. I hadn't prepared with it. I hadn't practiced with it. I'd practiced the songs a certain way. And so on the day I was like a rabbit in the headlights and I couldn't lock in with it. And then it became this, it's a strong word, but it became a click track trauma for me.
Right.
And I just thought I'd failed. And actually the producer ended up getting another guy in to do some of the percussion. I was like, I've basically been fired here because he just lost faith in my time. So that first time I had a really bad experience with it, but then a drummer friend of mine, she was like, you know, just try and play the song through by yourself in your head with a click. Right. And then I was like, well, how can I make the click my friend? And I started to make it more musical and try and just have a musical sound, because in that first recording, it was just intrusive. It was a horrible sound. And then I was like, well,
it's the world's most boring percussionist.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, if I make this more of a cowbell, actually, at least I can feel like I'm playing with an instrument. And then actually it became like a mission of mine to do like a recording with it. And when we went to London and we did another serious EP with a different band, I actually really nailed the click. I was able to be free from it. But be locked in with it. But
it's a different skill set, right?
So and then I've had all these debates about the the human feel versus the the type of, and again it's being selfless with it and putting the music first. It was what type of thing, that the band in London was very raw and we were kind of better live. Capturing that is tricky, I think. So I've had a love-hate relationship with the click in answer to your question.
Sure, yeah. It's a different skill set. You have to practice playing with a click. That as its own sort of thing. And I have a very similar feeling to you. Like certain applications, it's wonderful. For recording, the reason it's wonderful is not for the playing aspect, for the production and editing aspect. that's what makes it so crucial. So that you can use, if you have an amazing first verse from take one and an amazing chorus from take two, if they're on click, you just, nail them together in the machine. It's like, the whole thing is magical. But it's possible to be human sounding around a click. That is a possible thing.
To keep the feel. Keep the feel. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, it depends. It's sort of antithetical because, all the pop records we grew up on, all the Motown, all the stack stuff, none of those were cut to click track. And those tempos breathe. The bridge gets a little happier. The verse can come down a little bit, like slow down 3 BPM, and it's not the end of the world at all. So there's a way to sort of navigate these things. The place where I do, again, really appreciate them is when I'm a substitute player on a gig, or especially like a Broadway pit gig. Like I don't have to guess at any tempos. Like the tempo is right here. No, the tempo is here, and that I find invaluable because, when you're subbing in, if you're a deputy player, you've got all these other sorts of things and you're trying to cover all these bases at the same time. And, having to then guess at tempos on top and hope that you're right, it just adds another layer of stress to the gig,
It's kind of juggling act going on.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I had another experience where I was an analog recording and one of the fills, I basically messed up one of the fills in the middle of the song. And it was only drums in that part. And because it was analog, the engineer was like, all right, we're going to basically all hold the buttons on the mixing desk.
Yeah.
You're going to sit in the room by yourself. You're going to wait for the fill, redo it.
Yeah.
We're going to drop you in by releasing the buttons and then hit them again after you've done the fill. And I was like, what if I balls it up again? And he's like, well, you might lose the track because there's a tail.
Try not to do that.
Try not to do that. So as a teenager, I'm sitting in this room by myself waiting for this. And it wasn't a complex fill. It was just like a da, and and I just waited and I did it. And I just froze and just waited for like my guitarist to come in and hurl a cymbal at me or something. But I got it. But that also made me appreciate now in hindsight the analog thing because it's like film actually because I do film work also. But it's the same as recording on film. The stakes are up, so there's there's a quality to it. In terms of not just being able to digitally have an endless amount of storage space.
One of the last times I recorded on 2-inch magnetic tape, there was something got hit in the intro and, there was a little dropout in the intro. And the solution was, the producer was, a good friend of mine, Don Dixon. He said, all right, no problem. I'll just take the razor blade out, cut the 2-inch tape, with the blade on the little block and do a splice. And I was like, my man, wouldn't ever, and I used, I came up in radio production, so I used to cut 1/4-inch tape all the time. No problem. I would do, 100 edits for a special, promo or something like that. Not a problem. I was totally used to it. But cutting 2-inch magnetic tape, I'm like, oh, dude, the stakes are really high. Like if you blow that cut, you blow the tape or whatever, suddenly like, the take is gone and the real tape is gone too. Like you got to really like know what you're doing. And he did, and it was great. It worked out great.
Very different to a hard drive and
backers.
Yeah. It gives you an appreciation for it. So what's so you've written a memoir. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about that and where they can find it and so on? How did that come about?
Sure. It's called Am I Famous Yet? Memoir of a Working Class Rock Star. And it's available on Amazon worldwide. Anybody can find it. It's around. The way it came about was it's kind of what we were talking about earlier. Like I'm sort of, as I would be at a dinner break between sound check and a show. If something weird, the band's all sitting around, having the 6-foot-long Italian sub or whatever the promoters provided for the evening. If something weird happened that day or something untoward happened and, transportation, a microphone went haywire, something weird, it would always remind me of something else that happened even weirder at a previous gig somewhere else. So I would just tell the band, like, it was like, oh, this reminds me of the time when such and such happened, and I have so many of these stories that people were starting to tell me, like, you should write these down, like you've got so many of them, so many road stories. And I started, I was like, yeah, I could do that. Cause I used to write, in my public relations publicity days, I wrote artist bios and press releases and album liner notes and all that kind of stuff. So, I can write. I had that. I understood what that was about. So I started to put those things down a few years ago and got mostly done with it, in the current form that it's in. And then March 2020 happened and all the gigs went away. Suddenly I had lots of time to really go through, edit it, finish it, get my aunt used to be a copy editor at Time magazine. So she like very kindly copy edited the thing for me. So most of all the typos got pulled out and all my horrendous grammar mistakes got corrected. And then was able to get it formatted and put up on Amazon and the whole thing, and actually sold a few copies and paid a couple months rent with it, which is fairly shocking for an independent, self-published, self-generated kind of venture. And then I have some other friends of mine who are also musician authors who found got their books published with publishing houses and probably got more copies out there in the world, but didn't make any money off of it. So it's it's almost like the indie recording days, if you sell the records or the CDs out of the trunk of your car, you're going to make all the money, but you're going to have a finite sort of distribution network. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the trade-off I took, and I'm very happy with the way it came out, and people seem to enjoy it. And like I said, I've got some repeat customers, and they've bought copies for friends, and it's been good.
Yeah,
it's been really
awesome,
nice.
man. I'll have a read. That's really awesome.
Yeah, cheers.
What's I going to say? It'll come back in us. So the notion of fame.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, the notion of fame is a big one, particularly in this day and age. I know, we all have those dreams, and I had those dreams of
right.
playing in an arena or a stadium, or
right.
But really, in essence, for me, it was always about like just trying to land with an audience and connect with an audience. The fame side of things seems to be, having had small snippets of that kind of thing, it seems to be a very gray thing to tussle with.
Yeah, it's a very tenuous thing. I played in an arena last week.
Oh wow!
I played to 10,000 people. I played with the Tokens, who were the guys who sang "The Lion Sleeps Tonight." We're opening for Peter Noon and Hermits, and it was at the New Jersey Garden State Arts Center. 10,000 of our closest friends, and I was like, "This is great. It's lovely." Am I famous? I don't think so. Not from that. I played there a bunch of times, probably 4 or 5 times there now. It's great. It is really wonderful. And they have a thing that they do at the end of the Lion, where they get the entire audience to sing along with the falsetto part. Right? So when 10,000 people do that coming at you, it's this amazing wave of energy. It's shockingly wonderful and beautiful. But fame, from the record company days, I was hanging out with the rock stars on the label, and those people arguably are quite famous, but fame is a very sort of tenuous thing. The example I used to use was Janet Jackson, because she'd sold 10 million copies of one of her albums in the 90s or whatever. But now, a modern corollary might be somebody like Justin Bieber. Think of somebody who's just sort of uber famous, but in the United States, I don't know what the population is these days, 330, 350 million, something like that. So if he gets 10 million, 20 million views or downloads or whatever of his song, that means that arguably there's 300 million people who potentially don't know who he is and don't care. So he's famous. Does my grandmother know who he is? Maybe not. And then I would find things like at certain shows, and I've seen this with other other musicians, especially sort of mid-level kind of famous, like sort of when you're at the venue and the crowd is paid to see you, you're famous in the venue. And you're kind of famous, like when I would do the Broadway show Rock of Ages, the band was on stage. So when we would come out the stage door, there would be a scene or a barricade and people are waving their playbills and they wanted, not me so much, usually the lead in the show, but occasionally they would want me to sign the playbill or take a photo or sign it over for whatever. And I was, quote unquote, recognizable or famous until I turned the corner on 8th Avenue. So for half a block, I'm recognizable. And then as soon as you get around the corner, you're right back into obscurity again. So that kind of thing happens at different levels too. So, and also being around the famous people, the uber famous when I was working the record company, the fame didn't make these people happy people. Some of them are some of the more tortured artist types you can imagine, so wanting the fame and the acceptance, and what do we think we want? People to like us, or we want the money, or some combination of both. But that's not going to fix your inner demons, whatever they happen to be, And that was an important realization to have kind of early on.
Yeah, it seems like that experience in the music industry was really kept you grounded in a way.
It did, and also in a way that I wasn't aware of at the time. So again, in retrospect, when I find these pictures of my dad's attic and I'm standing next to Sade and Cheap Trick and Greg Allman and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and I've got all these pictures, and I never used to put them up on my website because I felt like when I left the business and started being a player, these were not people that I'd played with. These are people that I'd worked with on the business side. So somewhere in my adolescent brain, that didn't count. Like it only counted if I was actually performing with them. And, the guys in Living Color, like individually, I did get to play with them sort of later on down the road. And, but then when I found the pictures that I had stashed, years later, I'm like, no, it counts. It counts that I was around that energy and those people at that time, so it's fun that I have, it's a great photo album. Let's put it that way. Like it's fun to look at. I've got a picture of Bono from U2 strangling me. He's got his hands around my throat. And we were both, I was working with Sam Moore from Sam and Dave, and we were, I was standing next to Sam and suddenly Bono and the Edge show up. What we were stage side in France watching Wilson Pickett. So suddenly we're all fans of Wilson Pickett because, he's one of the originators of rock and soul. And Sam was his label mate, like he's an old friend of his. So like we're all fans, and I just happened to be standing next to this uber famous rock star and somebody had a camera. I said, "Hey, do you mind if I get a photo?" And he's like,
that was
hands around the throat. Did I work with Bono? No. Do I have an interesting photo? Yeah, I got a cool photo.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, it resonated what you said about when you disappear around the corner.
Yeah.
Just had an experience in Vietnam. A friend and I went. He was friends with a well-known singer there, and she was being sort of paparazzi'd and things. But we went to a hotel thing where she was performing in a very grand setting in very glamorous clothes and everything. And then literally like an hour after the show, we were in Vietnam in a little street food cafe. She was in normal clothes in like an alleyway, just eating like street food.
Yeah.
And the contrast, it was really nice because it was so humbling to be with her in that setting, but it's just the contrast between the two. Exactly what you say. You turn the corner and
when she was being left alone and ignored in the street.
This wasn't that full on over there, but just that contrast of her on stage to then tiny little plastic chair. Street
and
food.
the same. There's an extension to that too. Like if she becomes like uber famous in Vietnam, where she can't even go to the grocery store, kind of famous without the paparazzi. In Hong Kong, for instance, she could be completely anonymous.
Unknown, yeah.
Yeah, like the next country over.
I always think of the Dandy Warhols. They blew up in Greece,
Right.
There was something, it's the zeitgeist or whatever in Greece at the time. They had a huge there was just something about that, and you know, I see it here in Germany and Australia, like different. Yes, you're right. You could be completely anonymous somewhere, and God's in another.
Right. Yeah, it can be very territorial or regional, or it's like I said. Yeah. I constantly say this: fame is a very tenuous thing. It's very relative. It's very site specific. There are very few people who are world famous. Like either your Elvis or your Michael Jackson kind of thing. But
to be able to do it, sustain it, do it in a fulfilling way, have an audience. I mean, that's living the dream, basically.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with that.
Do you have a daily routine in terms of your craft? Like, are you very regimented with your bass licks, the exercises and stuff?
That's interesting. My schedule is highly erratic, and because of that, I do try to be regimented about things just to give my life some semblance of feeling like it's structure. I don't practice every day, but like I'll go for a 5-mile run every day. Like if I don't go for my run every day, like it really kind of, I don't feel right kind of thing. The practicing at this point has not become mostly about, like when I was in music school, you would spend time like trying to just get dexterity, get facility, get working on, bebop licks or whatever your vocabulary was, trying to, execute certain things, left-handed paradiddles, whatever you're working on, that kind of thing. But in later years, what it becomes now, all my practice time is developing repertoire. Like this week, I am subbing on a new Broadway show. And for that, they give you the charts, and they give you a sound recording and or a conductor video, and they give you as much time as you need. Take as much time as you need. Call me when you're ready. And usually this is like 2 to 4 weeks, a month, 3 to 4 weeks minimum, where you have to prepare and prepare and prepare. Because what happens is you go in and do your first, there's no audition. Your first show is a full performance in front of a paid audience. And you get one shot at it. And at the end of that show, the conductor either gives you the thumbs up or the thumbs down. Wow. And you're preparing all of your hours and hours and hours of maybe for naught. Like, you don't want to work out the hourly rate that you're doing for your very first Broadway sub. And also because of that, the pressure, just the internal pressure, just feels enormous. Like you almost have to wear a diaper to your first show because it just feels that stressful. And somewhere around the third song, in pretty much any new show, like I break out into a sweat and I just go like, I just don't want to be here. I want to put my bass down. I want to walk out of the building. I want to quit the business. This is no fun. And then, hopefully, 8 shows in, 10 shows in, suddenly it starts to be fun in a way to maximize your profit kind of thing. So what I do, while I'm preparing for this show, like every day for the last month, I've had to run this book. Like sit down with the recording and play through it. I can do it in about 75 minutes top to bottom. On top of that, this week, I'm also doing a first-time gig with a Donna Summer tribute artist who I've never met before. And they sent me all the charts for that like yesterday. And I read through all the charts, and they look good. The charts look good. As I started to read through the charts, I realized, they're not good. They're not good. They're not complete. They're not accurate. So I just spent like an entire half a day just annotating, making corrections, writing all the end. There's no endings on any of them, so they have all these specific endings. I had to write those in. And I'm just like hoping for the best. I'm going to have to run that again, somewhere between today and 2 days from now to figure that out. So it's become like regimented in that it depends on how much new material I have to prepare for the week.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's prep for the gig.
Exactly right.
Makes sense.
And a lot of that for me is chart writing transcriptions and writing bass lines out, because I got to this point, I can't remember anything anymore. My hard drive is full, my internal hard drive. So I'll write it down and put it on the iPad so I can just read it.
I always think just the music transcription is a beautiful thing, like the language, the written language of music, whether it's to still do that in this day and age, you know?
Well, for me, it facilitates learning it. It facilitates memorizing it. Like once I've written out, okay, this lick is this, it's a blues scale in G minor. Once I write it down, I go, oh, okay.
It's in
there. Yeah. So the next time I go through, like I almost, I just glance at it and go like, oh yeah, blues lick in G minor, and play it.
Yeah.
So it's also good at sort of developing the ears, because I'm trying to listen to maybe a pop recording and just hear just the bass part, what that player is doing, but also hear the chord voicings around it. So I know, like, major, minor, diminished, whatever. So I know that if I can add any sort of connective tissue to the music. So it helps. It's not crucial. You don't have to transcribe and read or write music to be a successful musician. And people have demonstrated that over and over. But it helps you assimilate also, like, in college, I was transcribing jazz solos by McCoy Tyner and Ornette Coleman and people, Eric Dolphy. I mean, it helps you to really recognize what their vocabulary is and then figure out, by pulling apart each and every note. It's laborious. It takes hours. It takes hours to write this stuff out. But by pulling it apart and then reassembling, you can sort of decide whether that's stuff that you want to take in as your own vocabulary. Or anytime, I'm on a gig and they say, like, we have to do a Motown tune. I'm like, great. Give it to me. And I take it home because James Jamerson, one of the greatest bass players ever to pick up the instrument, I get to transcribe another Jamerson line. Like, to me, that's a privilege because his vocabulary is such a part of the entire fabric of popular music because he was one of the innovators on the Fender bass guitar. So I'll write his stuff out happily because I'm just going to steal every one of his licks I can, use it as my own. And same thing with Duck Dunn from all the Stax recordings, all the Booker T and the MG's recordings. I love writing that stuff down because I get to keep it. That's a friend of mine said, like all this practice stuff, you get to keep. You keep it internally and keep it as part of your skill set going forward.
You're getting a true picture of their unique voice.
Right.
You can take things from it or leave, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
And you're learning their vocabulary, their specific, because we all have a bag of tricks that we rely on. When you see like the Jamerson stuff, like, some of his chromatic approach stuff that he does, I'm like, yeah, I'm using that for sure. That's going to be part of my life going forward. It's great.
Yeah. Awesome. I have a thing with guests on the show where I like, and not to put you on the spot, but for them to offer the listeners some kind of challenge. It can be a challenge. We're not talking anything grand, but I mean, relative to music or anything from your journey. Is there something you would suggest to, I mean, more specifically, I don't know, maybe somebody who hasn't picked up an instrument before or somebody who's, is there anything that springs to mind?
Challenges. I challenge people and myself to just keep an open mind and listen to things that you wouldn't necessarily assume are for you. Like, because there'll be things that you'll find, like you say that you're like just like a hardcore rhythm and blues fan. That's your thing. And somebody sends you a link, it's like, check this out. This is a speed metal band. You're like, I don't like speed metal. It's not my thing, Listen to it anyway. Because there's something in there musically that's interesting that may have come from rhythm and blues. You don't even know it. Like, I find that, just by trying to stay open, or not limiting any genre. Because I know I've heard so many people say, I like all kinds of music, but I don't like country. I'm like, well, you've kind of cut off a giant chunk of artists who are really good. Like, there may be a lot of pop country that isn't so good. Maybe you don't like it. Fair enough, But if you checked out Willie Nelson stuff from the early 70s, like, hello, that's some of the most soulful music ever created. He's a soul singer. He just happens to be doing it in a band with a harmonica and a fiddle and whatever else, So that's my challenge. Keep an open mind.
It's actually a very cool challenge. Don't stay in one lane, broaden the horizons. And it's actually applicable to like being open to other people's views and perspectives as well. Like
Yeah.
there's musical tastes and genres, but it's a similar thing, being open to other perspectives. But in the musical sense, yeah, it's really cool. I challenged myself to listen to country music a few, and I was loving it. Like it wasn't the setting of Nashville or wherever it was. I couldn't really dial into that, but I could because it was storytelling. The whiskey and the pickup trucks,
sure.
it gave me an insight into a culture
Right.
I know nothing about, and I was like, this is, and musically as well, it's pretty cool. But yeah, that's an awesome challenge.
And there are ways in too. Like, say, for instance, like again, this country is just kind of a bad example, but because I love country music. But whatever. Let's say I didn't. If I was an R&B guy, like somebody just sent me a duet today by Trisha Yearwood and Aaron Neville. So Aaron, I'm a huge fan of. I grew up in New Orleans. That was my second home. Like watching the Neville brothers and all of his soul music. And now listening to Aaron sing a Patsy Cline cover with Trisha Yearwood was like, oh, okay, that's my way in. Like I get it now. I really get it on a deep level. I have a new appreciation for Trisha. Like I have no feeling about her really, but when I heard her sing with Aaron, I'm like, wow, she's a soulful singer. She's really good. So yeah, there are ways in. There are ways to find appreciation.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Where can people find you?
Funkboy.net, funkboy.net. Got links on there to everything, any possible social media platform. I got a presence there. Amazon links for the book. There's a YouTube version of me reading the book. There's a podcast version of me reading the book. It's available in it's Kindle, hardback, softback. Any way you can consume media, there's a way for it. There's a way for you to enjoy it. Only one of them will cost you money. To Amazon. All the rest of it, you listen on YouTube for free or the podcast for free as well.
Oh, awesome, man. Well, it's been a real pleasure chatting to you about all things music. It's a very unique thing, the music world. So thanks so much for sharing your stories and wisdom from the road.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for introducing me to all of your friends out there and the people I might not have met otherwise. So I really appreciate it. It means a lot.